Welcome to the How Soccer Explains Leadership podcast, where we explore leadership principles through the lens of the beautiful game.
Welcome back to How Soccer Explains Leadership. Thanks again for being a part of the conversation and engaging it and taking it and using it in awesome ways, no doubt, wherever you are. I am Phil Dark, your host, and with me is my co-host, my brother in arms, Paul Jobson. Paul, how you doing, man?
Still doing great. Had another full weekend this weekend. I had the opportunity to go back and work with Solar Soccer Club up in Dallas. They put together an ID event for their club, and great event, great talent, of course, in that club, and of course attracts coaches from all over the country. You know, all the way up to Cal and UCLA were there, and local colleges also, UTD. You know, your TCUs. So, but a fun event. Got to connect with a lot of great coaches on the club and college side. So it's always fun doing that and just helping families with that through that process that I'm doing now with SRUSA to help make those connections to the right fits for them. And I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about that today, maybe with our guest as well, who's been in the game for a little while. But I'm definitely excited about our guest today, Phil. But for that, man, how are you? How's the Dark household going?
Dark household is crazy as usual. You know, even though we only have two in the house, I feel like my youngest is the equivalent of 3 or 4. He had a couple state cup games. You know, they won in a shootout in their quarterfinals, I guess. And then they, he had to have a basketball game right after a soccer game, of course. Had to miss his flag football game because of the PK shootout. Took it a little longer, so he had to miss his flag football. You know, but that's kind of the story of our week. It started on Friday night with Kirsten's game. Unfortunately, we had another loss, but you know, we're hoping we can pull it together for the last few games, make playoffs. But you know, just a lot of stuff going on. The big thing, though, I was able to clear out all those boxes that I got from my dad's house of tools and things. I don't know what half the tools do because my dad was the tool guy, but you know, I figure gotta organize them at least and put them in and hopefully figure out what they do at some point. You know,
Just figure it out, man. Just start playing with them and just figure out what they do, and you know, as long as there's nothing explosive, you should be okay.
It's pretty much, it's like coaching, right? You got these tools in the toolbox. You're not sure what they do until you figure it out on the field, and then you can put it together and figure out how to use these things.
Phil, I just got a bad image of finding some YouTube video of you doing something crazy with a tool. Like you see those workout videos where you see people on workout benches doing things. You're like, how did they even come up with that idea on that workout bench? You know, that's gonna be you with like a skill saw or something. I don't know.
Well, I don't know if I'm gonna mess with the skill saws, but you know, that is how creativity creates new things. That's how new things happen. So you never know. You never know what's going to happen. Anyway, today we have a great guest, as you talked about. You know, this is a man who paved the way for you at Baylor before you and Marcy were able to do what you did there, founded the program there, has been working with the Nigeria women's national team at the Pitt Panthers, being working there as well. We got Randy Waldrum. Randy, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you guys so much for having me. And I had to get a laugh out of listening to you guys talk about the tools. I barely know what a screwdriver does. So yeah, I just call somebody. So so I can relate. Yeah, I can relate. But no, thank you for having me, and great to see you guys again, and appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because my wife said, "What are you going to do with all these tools?" I said, "Well, you know, if people come and work at our house, maybe they won't have it in their bag or something, and they can use it." But, you know, so Coach Waldrum, you know, we on this show just love hearing stories. We love hearing what got you to where you are, what got you to be able to do what you're doing today, and that you get to do what you're doing today, right? And so how did you, you know, just briefly share your story. How did you develop your passion for soccer, for coaching, for leadership? And how did you end up with the Nigerian national team and Pitt Panthers and where you're at today?
Yeah. Well, I guess the version that for maybe the listeners to understand is my family, my dad and his 3 brothers owned a sign manufacturing company. So you guys, Paul can relate being down in Texas, but like Dairy Queens, you know, or big restaurant chains down there, they made all the signs for Dairy Queen. So those kind of signs, hotel signs, you know, businesses. And of course, my brother, my sister, all my cousins, everybody went to work, you know, for the family business. And I was the one that was like, I don't really want to do this. You know, I love playing soccer. And so I went off to Midwestern State there, a small school up in Wichita Falls, Texas, and played 4 years there. And got my degree in education because back in those days, you couldn't make a living. There was no club soccer. The coaches weren't getting paid. So the only way you could make a living coaching and staying in soccer was to coach at high school or college. We just didn't have club soccer back in those days that were paying coaches. So I got my degree in education knowing that the only way is I could teach. So after a very brief pro career, I was drafted in the third round by LA. I think I was in the team maybe 4 or 5 months, got traded to Indianapolis, was there through the season, and then the leagues folded. So had a little one on the way and, knew I had to go get a real job and, take care of family. And so I actually started out my coaching career in high school. And actually the high school that I went to as a student, I went to Irving MacArthur High School. And when I went back, my first coaching job was at Irving MacArthur High School, which was kind of weird because a lot of the teachers were still there that I'd had just a couple of years earlier. And so now instead of being in their classroom, I'm in the teacher's lounge, with them and seeing them smoke and do things that I didn't know teachers did,
Like in the building, probably. During those
that's
days.
right.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
But I knew that I wanted to really coach at college. And so I kind of had a plan that after 5 years, if I didn't have a college job, I was going to leave. I didn't want to be labeled as a high school coach. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but I've always been very goal oriented of what I wanted to do. So fortunately, it just kind of worked out that after my 5th year at MacArthur, I ended up getting Shellis Heineman came to Texas at that time to take over SMU, the men's program. So he had recruited my goalkeeper, and I was, I guess, the only guy in Texas he really knew. So he offered me the assistant job. And so I was kind of doing club soccer and the assistant at SMU and kind of got my foot in the door with the college game that way. And then, of course, my first job was at University of Tulsa, where back in those days, the late 80s, coaches coached both men and women. And so all up until this point, I'd always coached on the boys' side. And at Tulsa was the first time I really was exposed to coaching women. And just honestly fell in love with it because I felt like on the men's side at the collegiate level, they kind of know it, they think they know it. They have all the answers already. Whereas the women, especially back in those days, there weren't a lot of good coaches on the women's side. There were still a lot of just parent coaches at the youth level. There weren't, there were only a handful of women's college teams back then. I think probably only around 100 teams, maybe even a little less. And so, again, I knew my path. I wanted to coach college, and then I knew someday I'd love to coach in a national team. And I just was watching the men's game and seeing this recycling of the same coaches in all of those positions. And so I just kind of made the conscious decision to go into the women's game at that point. And that's when the opportunity at Baylor came around. So the biggest decision was not whether I wanted to take the Baylor job or not. It was more of, do I want to get out of the men's game and go just solely into the women's game? And would that be the right move for me from a career path standpoint? And once I made the decision, I've never really looked back. I've never had a regret of leaving the men's game. We had a great 3 years there at Baylor. Funny story, Paul can relate to this because he obviously took the program there much further than I ever did. But that first year, I can remember scheduling games for Baylor and there were still a lot of new programs coming in at the time, but we went 17-3 that first year that we ever had a program. Now, I was smart enough not to overschedule in the non-conference. And I knew that back then A&M and Nebraska were the two kind of powerhouses in the conference. And that's the two teams we lost to. And I can remember sitting around a television and all the girls on selection day thinking that we were going to get in. And I knew I'd had enough experience to know we weren't getting in. We didn't have a significant win and we didn't have the strength of schedule to get in. But I always kind of laugh about that because they just believed, they just, as every game went by, we won more and more as a first year program. They really started to believe that we were that good. In fact, we played Nebraska. I think they were 3rd or 4th in the country. I think we only lost 2-1. A&M, we lost 5-4 in the Big 12 tournament in overtime. Although I won't tell you, we had a 4-1 lead in that game. We ended up losing 5-4. We don't talk about that, but
No.
That's kind of how I got the ball rolling. And then an interesting thing that you may find interesting is coming from Texas. Being born and raised there, I grew up. You either kind of grew up an Aggie fan or a Longhorn fan, and back then because of football, I grew up a Longhorn fan. So Texas was always kind of my dream job. And after the third year at Baylor, that job came open. And the two finalists were myself and Chris Petroselli. And he had just a year or two earlier won a national championship at Notre Dame, and they were one of the top two teams in the country. And I'm thinking, I've got this Texas job because he's not leaving Notre Dame for Texas. And sure enough, he left Notre Dame for Texas. And as fate would have it, Notre Dame called 2 or 3 days later, and I ended up taking the Notre Dame job, and it ended up being the best. It worked out the best for me. And, we went on and had the good fortune to win a couple national championships there. But it kind of was at that time that I really started looking at national teams and getting involved. And when I was at Notre Dame, I kind of took over Trinidad and Tobago's national team, trying to get them into the World Cup. And we were the last team out. Ecuador beat us in a home and away leg. We tied up in Ecuador and then got back at home, and I think outshot them 17-2. And they scored in the 92nd minute to advance to the World Cup. So we missed in that opportunity. And then I guess, really long story short, I left Notre Dame, kind of went into the pros, with the Dash for 3 years. And then after they let me go, I ended up coming back to the college game. And that's kind of how I got back to Pitt. But you ask about Nigeria, and that's really a really interesting thing, is because when I was in between jobs between Houston and Pitt, and I was just kind of looking what was going to be my next move in life, my phone one day in September of 2018 just started blowing up, and people going like, congratulations. I'm going, for what? And then they're going, well, you just got named Nigeria's new national team coach. Well, I had never spoken to Nigerian at all. In fact, the only reason that there was a conversation was Sunil Gulati had called about a month earlier and said, would you be interested in the Nigeria job? And of course, I was in between jobs, and I was like, sure, I'd be interested. And that's all. I never spoke to Nigeria, but they announced it. It was in the papers. Everything came out. So from September to late November, early December, I'm trying to reach the federation going, well, if I'm your coach, we probably ought to discuss a contract and the terms and all of that kind of thing. And I could never get an answer. And so the Pitt job came open, and I took it, and I let Nigeria know that, hey, I'm taking another job. I haven't heard from you. And of course, then they started writing going, oh, well, please, we've already got you a place. We got you, an apartment, everything's set, don't take the Pitt job. And I said, no, it's too late. So they ended up in that time hiring Thomas Dinnerby from Sweden, and he took them through the 2019 World Cup. And then he left again in 2020, I believe, during the Olympic qualifications. So they called me back and asked me if I would do it. And I said the only way I would do it is if I could keep my job at Pitt. I knew Nigeria and the lack of resources and, no insurance. And I wasn't going to live in Nigeria, and all the things that I knew were issues there. I said that would be the only way I would do it. And so that's kind of how that came to being. I think they went ahead and announced it again the second time before we ever got a contract done. So they couldn't really come back and say no to me on the Pitt situation, because they had already announced it 2 different times before they did their due diligence. But that's kind of how I got into that. That really all came about through Sunil Gulati.
That's fantastic. I don't know how many people get a national team job without applying for it. That's amazing.
That's right.
That is incredible. I love it. And we'll get into that run you guys were able to have and all the exciting things that have happened there here in a little bit. But there's one other thing I want to mention, because I know I'm part of it, and I hope other people are getting to be, but you have a Telegram group. Telegram's this relatively new thing. It's like Paul and I got on Clubhouse for the month and a half that it was a really big thing in the soccer community. I know it's still a thing. It's just not nearly as big. But can you just talk a little bit about that? What's the desire for that? Why'd you start this thing? It's not like you don't have anything going on right now. So it's, what would kind of incite you to do that? And then, is it part of something bigger you got going on? Or is it just something you wanted to do for fun on the side?
No, what I've always enjoyed doing is I was really lucky as a younger coach back in the day of having some really good mentors in my life, a Shellis Heineman, a Bob Gansler, a Mooch Meyernick before he passed away. And, I could go on down the list. My high school coach, Simon Sanchez, before he passed away, was probably responsible for the passion that I had for the game. So I was really lucky in that regard. And then I've spent probably 15 to 18 years with U.S. Soccer as a staff coach for coaching education. So I love teaching the coaching courses and that kind of thing. And so I've always liked that piece of it, coaching education and kind of mentoring and helping, when I can. So over the years, I've just had a lot of coaches reach out, like I'm sure you guys have as well, and asked opinions on things and how do you do this or how do you do that? And so I just thought, you know what, it's a good way to start this coaches community, especially in today's world where coaching education has gotten so expensive. And of course, back when we went through our license program, you're there for a week or 2 weeks, or 10 days or whatever. Now, of course, the license are over a year and quite expensive. So I just thought there was still a need to give back to the game that way with young coaches who might not have the money or the wherewithal to go through coaching education at this point, but that we could get on this coaching community and share some ideas. And we've really just got it cranked up. It's just in the last few days have some people started to discuss and throw some practices in and some ideas about it. But I'm trying to share a couple of practices or videos or things each week. And then we've got a networking room in there where all the other coaches that have joined can throw out a topic and discuss amongst themselves. So it's just another way to give us a pathway to maybe learn from each other because, even after doing this almost 35 years now, I'm still learning, and still want to learn. And if we're going to stay on top of the game and the trends of the game now, you can't stay set in your old way. So it's just that way to kind of give something back. And that was the purpose behind it.
Yeah, I could say, Randy, just from my experience, like you've always been accessible to younger coaches and any coaches, and you've never been a coach. You have every opportunity to come off as arrogant and know it all because I think you do know it all. You know a lot at least, but you've always been very accessible, very kind and generous with your knowledge of the game, and even to the point of never really feeling intimidated by you. And I've always appreciated that. And I think this is just another extension. You've been able to extend yourself to even more coaches that way. So I value that. I really appreciate that as a coach who I think probably, I didn't call you a lot, but anytime I did call you, you always answered the phone. And I'm like, gosh, I can't believe Randy's actually talking to me, so that's, I can just say like, that is a great thing for coaches, other coaches to understand too, is that I love that. Like you're never done learning.
Yeah.
The game is constantly changing. And that's one thing I love about the game, right? It is constantly changing. And as coaches continuing to rediscover kind of yourself at times, but also you taught me one time, like, hey, just always be true to who you are.
Yeah.
And you told me one time, I was going to never make excuses for that. And that stuck with me for years. Yeah. So I love that you're continuing to do that in other avenues.
No, I appreciate you saying that. And I do think there's a lot of young coaches out there. I just feel like I was fortunate to have some good people in my life. And if I can help one person do one thing better, I think then we're making the game better. And that's what we're all in it for. I had the unfortunate opportunity to have to go back to Tulsa last week for one of my former players passed away. And so I went back to his funeral. But kind of in line with what we're talking about and always learning, when I saw a lot of my players, and these were my men's players from back in my early days at Tulsa, and when I saw all those guys, I just said, hey, guys, I have to apologize. And they're like, for what? And I go, how bad of a coach I was back then. I said, before I knew anything about sports science, we ran those 15-30s with no rest, 15 up, 30 back, and then go again. I said, I thought if I made you guys puke or pass out, we had a good day. I said, I didn't know, and so we do all learn and still learning. And as you said, the game's changing, so you've got to stay on top of it.
Yeah. And water was for wimps, right? I mean, you need to drink water.
That's, yeah. You didn't need a break. Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. Randy, through your career, obviously, and just everything you're doing and have done, I mean, there's got to be something that, you can always come back to, like, and we love hearing people's different stories on this, but what would you say is your why? Like what makes you do what you do? Why do you do what you do?
Yeah. Well, I think my why, honestly, Paul, has changed over the years, and I've got to be real honest about that. Mm-hmm. When I started coaching, it was all about just trying to be a successful coach, and that meant winning games. So you're hyper focused on just winning. How do I make the team better? How can I win games? Because I didn't have that maturity to understand as a young coach that there's more to it than just winning games. And I think as we all get older, we realize now the winning is important because we have to keep our jobs and those kind of things. I mean, we get what we're in this for. But I think we've all, as we've gotten older, learned to appreciate how we're changing these players' lives, and how we can maybe have an influence, even if it's a small piece, into a player's life and their development. So I get as much satisfaction now seeing our former players go off, get married, have kids. I've got the player that passed away, ironically, was David Gordon that played for me at Tulsa, and his daughter Ashton played for me the last 2 years here at Pitt, and we've just hired her as our assistant coach. So stories like that where you see the players go off and have a successful life, and some stayed in the game and some don't. So I think the why is, for me, just to try to create an environment where we can get the most out of the player that we possibly feel like we can, and that player can achieve the goals that they hope they reach. But at the end of the day, that they come out of this with a better understanding about life in general and what it takes to be, a good person and lead a productive life and to do things the right way. And so my why has changed over the years. And as we've gotten older and a little bit more mature. So I'm happy to say it's changed over the years. I was probably in it for the wrong reasons early. It was my fix because I wasn't playing anymore. So it's like, okay, I get my competitive fix by coaching and winning games. And that's the way I thought you were always measured, is just by wins and losses. And I've just learned that that's not the case.
Yeah. It was such a great lesson there for all of us, that it's okay for your why to change, right? It's okay. As we talked about, the game is constantly changing and developing, and people, we're through our experiences that we have in life, whether it's influences of people or experiences, it can change, why we do what we do. And I love you saying that. I've always gotten that from you, that it is about those players. And that's something we hear constantly on this show from great coaches and great mentors, that it's hardly ever about the X's and O's, that it really is about, that's the common theme, the bond that we have that drives us. But at the end of the day, it's about that, how are we developing young people and sharing, what we have experienced, whether successes or failures, right? We learn,
right,
and hopefully pass those on. There's so much to dive in here too. You talked a little bit about that, how you were given the Nigerian national team job basically without knowing it. You took the Pitt job and then were able to take the Nigerian team at the same time. And I'm sure we'll talk about Ben's role within Pitt at some point too, and an amazing coach you developed within your own household. But take us through that year, a great year with Pitt, a great year with the Nigerian national team. Just kind of take us through some of the things maybe we didn't see or know that kind of made that such a great year.
Yeah, well, I can tell you this: the start of the year wasn't a great year. It kind of all started for us, as far as Nigeria is concerned, with the African Cup of Nations, and we went through the Cup of Nations, and Nigeria just expects to win it because they won it, I think, 9 or 10 times, and Nigeria just expects, because they're Nigeria, it's kind of ordained that they should automatically win. And we got into the game against Cameroon in the round of 16, which we won, and that qualified us for the World Cup. So to me, that was the big goal. Winning the Cup of Nations to me was secondary, but Nigeria, it was almost equally as important, if not more so, than the World Cup qualification. And so in the semifinal of that tournament, we were playing Morocco, and in Morocco, in front of about 45,000 people. And in the second half, we're 0-0, and we had a player about 5 or 6 minutes into the second half, we had a player step on one of their players on their feet, 2 players coming together for a tackle, and our player stepped on her foot, and it was an immediate red card. So now we're down a player. We actually score a goal, down a player. They come back a few minutes later and score to tie it. Then 5 minutes later, same thing, step on a foot, another red card. So now we're 2 players down. We've got about 30 minutes left of regulation time to get through. And there's chaos on the bench. I mean, my Nigerian assistants refused to make some subs I was trying to make. They had the cards, and I was getting Lauren Gregg to go get this sub ready, because I'm on the sidelines trying to, figure out 2 players down. I gotta move some things here, right? And I'm looking around, and 5 minutes later, the sub's still not ready. And I'm going, Lauren, where's this sub? And she's like, Randy, he won't fill out the card. So I have to go over to the bench, and he wanted input of who to put in. And I said, I don't need your input, right? Just fill the card out and let's go. So anyway, long story short, we made it through 30 minutes of regulation. Then we made it through 30 minutes of overtime and got it to penalty kick. So we played 60 minutes, a little over 60 minutes with 2 players down, and got it. So everything we did, I think, was right. We got it to a point to give ourselves a chance to at least win, and we lost in penalties. So at the end of the game, there was a bit of a confrontation with he and I afterwards because he had not done what I told him to do. And then our players boycotted and wouldn't come out of their rooms for the next 2 days because we still had to play a 3rd place match, and because they hadn't been paid. So they boycotted and wouldn't come out of their room. Long story short, the federation comes in and brings a little bit of money for them and appeases them. And so we play the 3rd place match the next day, but we hadn't done any recovery training after playing all that time, 2 players down. Didn't do any preparations for Zambia. And we ended up losing the game 1-0, probably could have and should have won by 5. We just couldn't put the ball in the net. So now then we don't come out with any kind of a medal. So for the next 6 months, I am the worst coach in the country. I mean, the media in Nigeria is all over me. The federation, I wasn't sure if they were going to keep me or not. I mean, it was really, really a difficult time, to a point where I had to stop reading anything in the media. People were sending me articles from there, and it's just like, I can't keep reading this, and, that kind of went through there with Nigeria. And we finally, after the AFCON, then we went off and played the US twice. We played Canada twice, and we played, seems like we had one more big game in there. But, Japan. We flew to Japan and played Japan. So I was like, we don't need, coming off these losses, we don't need to play 5 games against 3 teams that are 3 of the best teams in the world. Like, we need to play a few games that we're going to regain our feet. But the federation, they book them for various reasons. And I'm sure all those countries paid for us to come, is why they booked those. So needless to say, we lost the first game to Canada. We drew with Canada the second game. We lost both games to the US, even though we played well and played close. And then we lost the game to Japan, although we played well in Japan. So all of these games were away. And so now we've lost, those 5 games. We've lost Zambia in the 3rd place game. We had lost to Morocco in the semifinal. So we've lost like 7 games on the bounce. Then they send us to Mexico, and we play Mexico and we lose 1-0. We play Colombia, we lose 1-0. So now we're 8, 9 games, on the bounce of losing. So it's only added to how bad of a coach, that I am in the country of Nigeria. So we finally recovered, and I think beat Costa Rica at the end, the last match in Mexico. And then we went on to Turkey, and we played Haiti, and we played New Zealand right before the World Cup. And we won both of those games. So we kind of started to see the team, start to gain some confidence again. But going into the World Cup, we were supposed to have 5 weeks in Nigeria to train, and then 2 more weeks in Australia to get ready, because all the other countries were in camp 6, 8 weeks before the World Cup. And Nigeria canceled our camp in Nigeria. So they said, just give me the 23-player roster and we'll fly you guys into Australia on like July 2nd or 3rd. So we basically had 10 days, to prepare for a World Cup. And maybe a little bit what this might be where being a college coach helped, because we have short preseasons. And I thought, well, I know how to maximize a few days, I've done this a long time, but it was really a trying time, because at that time the federation wasn't speaking to me. They tried to get me to take a player that I didn't want to take. And, my contract says I take my players, and all this is pretty well documented. So without getting into all those details again, I won't bore you guys with that, but there wasn't conversation, ahead of the World Cup. So I didn't really know until I got on the plane to go to the World Cup if I was actually going to be the coach going into the World Cup. So we had 10 days to prepare. I just said, to my own mind, I'm going to spend 10 days just preparing for Canada. That was our first match. And I said, if we don't get something out of that game, we're in trouble because you got Australia as the host nation. And, if you lose to Canada, odds are you're going to lose to Australia in our own, 3 points, even if we could beat Ireland, wouldn't be enough to get us through. So I knew we had to get something. So for those 10 days, we worked on two things. I just worked on defending in a block and countering because I knew we wouldn't have the ball very much. And we just drilled it for 10 days. And fortunately, it worked. I mean, we had some shaky moments against Canada and they dominated in possession. We had a few opportunities and we kind of grew into the game. But I don't know if you guys remember, but we saved a big penalty on Christine Sinclair. And I think that really helped us gain some momentum in the second half. So we got out of there with a point, which was absolutely huge for us. And you could kind of see the girls' confidence just continuing to grow, and then we got into that Australia game. And, I think, Paul, there's always key moments in matches. You can remember big matches that you guys had at Baylor and key things that changed games. And we went down with about 5 minutes left before the half in Australia. We'd played well defensively and created a few chances, but we had, the worst time to give up a goal 5 minutes before the half. And then fortunately, there was a couple of minutes of extra time and we actually got the goal back right before halftime. So I think that really was key to everything because now instead of being a goal down, we're going into halftime tied. And in the second half, we came out flying. We scored 2 more. We're up 3-1. And I can remember looking at my assistant, Kyle, and I'm going, can you believe there's 18 minutes left and we're winning this game 3-1? Like, how are we doing this, And I think there was 11 minutes of extra time. It was the longest 11 minutes ever. They finally scored a goal late to make it 3-2, but luckily there was only about a minute of that 11 minutes left. I think if they'd have scored earlier in the 11 minutes, they may have come back and got a result, but we end up winning that game. So now we're looking at we can win the group. Now we could still get knocked out completely if we don't get something out of the Ireland game. And so we went into that match and got a draw. We played at the same time Australia was playing Canada. So we're kind of keeping the headsets on. You don't want to go for it too much because if you lose the game, then you're out. But we wanted to make sure we at least got a point out of it. And then we found out in about the last 15 minutes that Australia had really opened up the score on Canada that we were in regardless. So we tried to make a push for it at the end and just didn't quite get it, but finished second in the group. And then obviously taking on England, in the round of 16. And I thought we played really well. Our best game. We were kind of on the front foot. I think England expected us to defend like we had all 3 games. And we decided to go at them a little bit. And I think it really worked. And, we took that game into penalty kick. So really, really proud of the job they did. It's the best results Nigeria have ever had in the World Cup. And to think that we could do that in 10 days was a pretty special group of players to be able to do that. But all the while we're doing that, Ben is back here at home getting Pitt ready for a big season. And, we came into this in 2018 to a program that had 2 winning seasons in 22 years. In fact, you'll appreciate this, Paul. The first game I had at Baylor as a brand new program was against Pitt. And they were a brand new program. Pitt came down to Baylor and played us. And Pitt scored right off the bat and went up 1. And I'm thinking, because you don't know what you have. It's a brand new program, And
Right.
I'm going, this could be a long season. And we end up winning 8-1 against Pitt. But Pitt was just really in a bad place when we took it over in 2018. So the last 3 years, we'd started winning and put together some winning seasons, which they had never done. And of course, in 2022, got into the NCAA tournament for the first time and made a good run, made it to the Sweet 16. So this year we had high expectations. And look, I had to be honest, I couldn't and I wouldn't have taken on the Nigeria job if I didn't have Ben here because he knows, he's basically been running it. He knows what I want. We think alike. Our game model is we see the game the same way, the way we want to play. And my AD was really good about supporting us on this. She's very good about giving back and community service and that kind of thing. And she understood the importance from a branding standpoint, what this could also do for us from a university standpoint. And So she's been great the whole process, but Ben really made things click. And I think I got back 3 or 4 days deep into preseason when we got things going. But this year we had a great year, even a better year than last year, getting to the Elite Eight. And probably a highlight of that for me was going to Arkansas and beating Arkansas there at their place when they, I think, had 32 game winning streak or something at home. And as you well know, the way they play, it's a very difficult team to play against. They're athletic and strong and direct, but it's funny because Ben had called, the coach of Tennessee had called Ben asking about Xavier because they had them in the NCAA tournament. And after they discussed Xavier a little bit, he asked Ben about Arkansas. And Ben said, you know what? I think if we can play our game, I think we can score 3 goals on them. And he goes, sure. There's no way you're scoring 3 goals on them. So after the game, I told Ben, I said, call him back and tell him he's right. We didn't score 3, we scored 4, but no, Arkansas obviously is a really, really good team. And that was a huge win for us. And then to go on to beat Memphis to get us to, again, Florida State. We played Florida State, I think, 3 times this year. We lost 5 games or 6 games this year. 3 were to Florida State. We played them in the regular season, and then we played them in the conference tournament semifinal, and then to the NCAA tournament. And they obviously, Brian had a great team there, as we all saw, through the tournament. But a really good year. So yeah, you're right. It was. I've been blessed, and yeah, at the end of the day, it all worked out. It really was looking bleak because I really thought going into the World Cup we could easily get beat by 3, 4, 5 goals in either of those first two matches. I just didn't think we were prepared. So much credit goes to the players who bought into what we were trying to do and just, put all of their grievances aside and decided to really focus on their football. So it was good. And I hope that people around the world got to see how talented the players really are.
Yeah. Well, we were definitely watching as a family, and I just remember just the emotional roller coaster of that, just from our standpoint. Of course, we're not in it, right?
Yeah.
But like the emotional roller coaster of all of that, and just being, super excited about, just watching those women play and the passion they had, the belief that they had, that they could do it. And that's what came across to me and Marcy's like, they're not just doing it, they believe they actually can do this. And without that, you really don't have a chance. But
no.
As a coach and a staff, if you can instill that into them, you guys obviously did a great job of that.
Yeah.
Another question I was going to, have you ever lost 8 or 9 games in a row ever in your career when you're going through that stretch with Nigeria? You're like, wait a minute, I don't think I've ever lost that many games in a row.
You know what? I haven't thought about it, but I think you're right. I don't think I ever have. I hope I never do again too. But
that's not fun. That's not fun, but
it's not fun. But it was a really tough stretch. But we all get challenged in life different ways. It could be like that, a coach on the field in a bad string of results. It could be something in your personal. We're all challenged with different things in life. And I think, you have to learn to be resilient. And as I told you before, stay true to what you believe in and stick to it. And at the end of the day, I've never been one to want to have regrets of how I did something. And so I've always had pretty strong convictions of believing in how I go about trying to do it. And not that I don't change sometimes when I see a better way, but I think you've really got to, really stay true to who you are and believe in what you believe in. And, I think, however people view it in my life, my faith's important to me. So I think God's got a plan for me, and it works the way it's supposed to work out in the end.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, Randy, I was thinking as we were talking through some of this, I kind of put it together in my mind, and I think this would be beneficial for me and beneficial, I think, for some of our coaches. You've had the opportunity you started a program from scratch at Baylor.
Yeah.
You went to Notre Dame and took over a program that had just won a national championship.
Yeah.
So you're trying to implement, like, really, really a young coach who had 3 years at a Division I institution and then taking over a national championship program, and then going on, obviously, leading that to other national championships. And then you had the opportunity to rebuild a struggling program after 20 years of not having success. Those are all pretty unique situations that a coach has. Can you kind of summarize in one, maybe it just goes back to you doing things the way you know how to do it, and none of that really mattered. I don't know, but can you kind of put that together for me?
Well, they're all three a little different because for me, Baylor was fun building from scratch. We didn't have anything. There was a club team there, but there was never a varsity team. So I think only one or two of the club players actually made our roster for the fall. But it was fun because everything was new for everybody. I mean, we didn't have the field, so to see a field being built, to ordering uniforms and not having it, and all kinds of things for being a first. Plus, I put a lot of miles on that company car there at Baylor of just going up and down, the highways in Texas and really hit Texas hard, to just get enough players to play in the fall. Because I don't think I was hired till February, and back then that was the signing date in February. And then we were playing that August. So, I was scrambling just to make sure we had a team. And so that was, it really was fun and it was enjoyable. And then to see those kids win, I think we went 10-0 before we ever lost a game at the beginning of the year. So to see those players and their confidence grow and the excitement of something new and the buzz on campus was really neat to see, so that was one thing to do it from scratch. And the thing I loved about that is I could build it my way, with my players. And so that had its own unique sets of challenges, of course. I think going to Notre Dame and taking over for Chris, being a top 5 team in the country, having come off a national championship, there's a lot of pressure to go, I can't screw this up, because it's like, I wouldn't want to be the coach that's going to follow Anson, right? And Chris didn't have, 20 national championships, but it's kind of the same thing. Brian following Mark Krikorian, and he and I had this conversation. It's not easy, to come into that situation because if you win, it was Chris's players or, it was Mark's players, for Brian. And it'll be that way for a few years when Anson steps down. But easier in one regard because you already had the players there. So we took a talented team. Difficult because you had to find that balance of what do you change to put your imprint on it versus how much of what they've been doing do you keep in place because you don't want to just, change everything. They've been successful the way they were. So that brought on its set of challenges as well. But I think the pressure for that job was probably more difficult than anything else, which is, and probably in hindsight, a lot of it was pressure I put on myself. I think we all put ourselves under more pressure than sometimes maybe we're really under. But I just had this, I had this burning feeling that I can't fail. I have to make sure this stays good. And then the hardest one probably has been here at Pitt, even though we've turned it relatively quick, because what we had to overcome is not only the first year we just inherited the team. We didn't have time to recruit. So 2018, I had to go through the year with the players the coach before me had, and they just weren't, in most cases, they weren't even Division I players. They clearly weren't ACC players, and it was awful. We didn't win a conference game. I think we only scored 2 or 3 goals in the ACC, and we gave up about 50. I mean, it was, you knew as soon as you gave up a goal in a game that's at the moment the game was over, right? We just didn't have enough talent. So that first year was really kind of a wash. And then year 2, we really just blew it up and started all over again. We brought in 17 new players as freshmen. So that second year, I think we had 9 freshmen starting for us, but we had to rebuild it. But the hard part of that, Paul, was the fact that we'd had 22 years of losing. This perception out there with club coaches, as you well know, and high school coaches is we're not sending our kids to Pitt. Like, why would we do that? The team has lost. And the fear was that because recruiting in the women's game, as you well know, is 2 years in advance. So Ben and I are looking at it going, well, we can't wait till 2020 to get good kids because then we'll lose in 2018 and 2019 and 2020. And then people will look at it and say, well, Randy, you haven't changed anything. You're still losing. So we knew we had to change things quick. So we did go the international route and grab some Canadians. And I think we brought in an Icelandic player and had a player from Spain. And, so I think we had a German player enter last year. So we kind of went that route to help us kind of start to win a little bit quicker. But I think that was probably the hardest of the jobs, just overcoming perception that was out there. I think we're still doing it right now, Paul. I mean, we're just now starting to get into the door of the better players in the country because we had a couple of years of winning. But to a lot of these young players, Pitt, as well as we've done the last 2 years, a lot of young players still don't think of Pitt as a powerhouse, right? It's Carolina has history, Florida State has history, Duke has history, Pitt has bad history, So we're just now building our history. So I think it's still going to take a few more years of winning and being in the tournament before the young players start to realize, wait, they are a top program. Even though we are now, we still got more work to do to, still to start to land the top kids here in the country.
Yeah, I remember those conversations that Marcy and I would have with club coaches when we took over Baylor. It was like, hey, we're glad you're here, but good luck with that.
Yeah.
And that was the common thread. I'm sure you met the same resistance. And you, differently than us, you bring in a reputation of success to Pitt that Marcy and I were still newbies on the block. Right. So there's a difference there. But through all of that, Randy, I mean, this show is obviously about, leadership in soccer. Like through those challenges, like what leadership lessons do you feel like you learned kind of through your career that you could pass on to some of our younger coaches?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me, is everywhere I've gone, I've had a really good picture in my mind of how I think the game should be played, what I think it should look like. And I think we do a really good job wherever we've been of being able to communicate that to the players, because that's a big part of it, right? Get the players to buy in. If you don't have the buy-in, then you're going to have issues. So I think we do a really good job of having this vision of what it should look like, and then having a way of presenting it to our players that they buy into that vision. I think the leadership aspect of it is one thing that I learned years ago was if I set high expectations and high standards and, whether we call it core values or, every program does it a little bit different. It's just like you discipline your children at home, right? They tell you they don't want discipline, but they really need to be disciplined and they want discipline, right? And it's the same way, I think, in running the program. And we're not a type program that's got 15 or 20, rules in our rule book. We've just got a few rules and a few core values that we live by it's really nothing more than, about being a good person and being respectful and, doing the right things with your life. And I think, we have to try to do that as the leaders, and everything we present, we have to present it that way. And we have to keep reinforcing that to our kids. And then I think from a standpoint of what you accept from your team is what you're going to get. So make sure your expectations are high enough that you're okay with accepting high standards. If you set high standards, but then you accept, lower standards, then you're going to have a problem. So I think we've always felt like players are going to make mistakes and we're okay, with that. I mean, that's what we're here for. We understand that, but doesn't give them an excuse for not putting the effort in and not putting the work in and not living their life away from the field and the expectations that we have with the way they treat people. And the biggest thing I get a kick out of, we went to West Virginia for a preseason game, I think this year, and stayed at a hotel. And, we're eating breakfast in the hotel, and the lady just came in and said, "Are you guys the coaches?" And we're like, "Yeah, we're the coaches." And he goes, "I just want to tell you, we had Ohio State in here a couple of weeks ago. They did like $13,000 worth of damage to the hotel. Like, your women have been such a pleasure to be here. They pick up after themselves. They do things like those are the kind of things." And I know you had those kind of kids, at Baylor. So those kind of things make you realize that you are making a difference, that you have set some standards, that they just do it. It's not punishment. It's just the way we do things. And I think that's kind of from a leadership standpoint. We could do a whole podcast on leadership, couldn't we? But those are some things I think it starts from, is just setting your standards and your expectations, whether that means on the field, off the field, both, however. And we kind of do that with our whole program. We just have a set of core values or expectations that we just feel like are extremely important to be successful. And we constantly are reinforcing those. Yeah. I think I think once you do that too, what you end up developing is a group of players who become your leaders that deal with a lot of those things. Then you don't have to always be the bad guy. So a lot of those things are dealt with by our players that there's probably things that have happened that we don't know about and probably don't need to know about, but it's been handled in the locker room. So it brings great leadership with the players. So I think if you talk to any of our players, I don't think they would tell you that we're dictators and that it's my way or the highway kind of thing. I think they're fully engaged in this is all our program and this is the way we do things. It's not Randy's program. It's not Ben's program. It's our program. And it's getting that buy-in to those expectations that I think become really, really important.
Yeah, there's so much there. Like you said, we could probably do a whole semester on just that last answer and all the leadership lessons that come out of it. I know even just talking about the Notre Dame job when you went there, and that's so important for a lot of people who follow, whether it's following a founder or following someone who's very successful, to have that. How do you continue the vision and put your stamp on it and have it not be just a vision that isn't yours?
Yeah.
Because you're the leader. So
Yeah.
you need to put that on at some level. I know that's what it was like when I took over a nonprofit. I once shared the vision and someone looked at me, and a friend of mine who does leadership development stuff, and he says, that sounds like someone else's vision.
Yeah. Yeah.
You really need to take a minute. And that's such a huge lesson that how do you know that until you do it?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And as you said, founding, that's a whole different set. Coming into a rebuild, that's a whole different set. And so you can't just say, well, I'm a leader, I'm going to do this the exact same way I've always done it, because that doesn't work.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
When you go into the Nigeria situation, that's a whole different situation from everything else you've done. And I love that. And that's so critical, as you said, though, to still have those core values.
Yeah.
That is who you are, as you talked earlier about being a man of faith, having that drive who you are and what you do and how that comes in. All that comes in that you say, we're going to bring this to it, but it's nuanced. You can't just say, this is the silver bullet that works everywhere. I love that. Love that, all that you just talked about there. So there's another little thing I want to just say. I'm a Manchester United guy, and you said on your podcast, 'cause this is a podcast, you said on the website of Pitt that, if there's one of the people, there's a couple other people on there too. One of the people you'd love to have dinner with is Sir Alex Ferguson. So I'd be curious, that I would too. That would be great. That would be an incredible dinner. But what would be one of the first things you'd want to ask him? And why that question? Why those questions?
Yeah. First of all, I'd probably be so starstruck I couldn't even speak. And I got the chance to sit down with him. When I was at Notre Dame, Bobby Clark was our men's coach, and Bobby Clark is Scottish, like Sir Alex, and Bobby played for Sir Alex when Alex was at Aberdeen. So Bobby knew him well, and we always would do a high school or a club and high school spring clinic for coaches to come in, and we'd bring in guest clinicians. So for years, we were trying to get Sir Alex to come in. Of course, he's in the middle of the United season in the spring, so he could never come. Of course, the year I left Notre Dame, he had just retired, and he came to Notre Dame. So I will say Bobby at least got him to autograph a book to me, to Randy.
Nice.
And he did send it to me. So I at least appreciated that standpoint. But a huge fan of his, and I think there'd probably be two things I'd really want to talk to him about. One would be man management, how he deals with the professionals in the locker room, because in the pros, it's different than the college game. And I found that out when I was in Houston, and I'd be very curious about his beliefs on just managing, because, as coaches of our programs, whether it be college or pro or club or high school or whatever, we're really the CEO of our organization, right? And that's kind of the way I view it. And I'd love to hear his thoughts on management. I've read many things. I know he's come to Harvard and given speeches and things on management, but I'd like to just really sit down and pick his brain about that. And then the second thing I think I'd want to get into is some X's and O's, a little bit with him, like, some ideas, and what do you think about this versus playing this way, versus playing that way, and I think I could sit with him all day to just talk shop and X's and O's. But yeah, you've been a United fan too. It's kind of like being a Cowboy fan. We've had some down years to go off of here for a while now. So we need to get things changed around quickly.
Yeah, you talk about man management. It sounds like we need some of that right now. As we're recording this, we're just coming off of Rashford hanging out in Belfast and
That's right.
being on the not even on the in the team for Newport County, which was
That's
more
right.
interesting than it should have been. But that's a whole different conversation for a different
Yeah.
day.
Yeah.
But it is relevant to the
Yeah.
leadership conversation, and it is
Yeah.
relevant because that if you can't get your player, and that locker room, that united locker room with the press, with the all the stuff that goes with that is in a day that has social media that, is just crazy. It's that man management is so important. And that you talked earlier about being a learner and a lifelong learner. And I love that. But can we just talk a little bit about the importance of that learning? I mean, even as you're talking about that X's and O's and man management from a guy who obviously has done that for years and years and years in different situations and obviously done it well with the success you've had. But not just learning from people in our discipline, but learning from people outside our discipline. That's something we've talked about on this show. And can you just speak of the importance of that?
Yeah. Well, I think Sir Alex, that's one of the reasons I would like to ask him that question, because he's one of those hard-nosed, old school kind of guys. And I would be curious to hear how he changed his ways over the years, as the game changed, as we all have, those days of the Vince Lombardi type coach, it doesn't work with the modern athlete today. But I've been influenced. I love reading books from other coaches or other business people that I can always think I can pick up one little nugget here or there, like Mike Krzyzewski has the book called The Gold Standard that talks about his tenure with the Olympic team. And I love reading that and trying to pick up a few nuggets of how could that translate to my team. Tony Dungy, the list goes on. Bill Parcells, I've read his book. So I read a lot of other coaches that aren't in our sport. I used to go watch Tubby Smith when he was a coach at Tulsa before he went and won a national championship at Kentucky. I used to watch his practices because I do think there's a lot of correlation with some of the movements in basketball, to our sport. So I'm always trying to do that. There's a great book out there called Good to Great by Jim Collins. It's just more of a business book, but talks about kind of getting all the players on the bus is important, but getting them in the right seat is also more important, right? That kind of thing. So I'm always just trying to find ways that I think I can pick something up that will make you a better man manager. So I love reading that. I think we've all changed and evolved. I mean, I can remember, it's almost probably embarrassing to say, but I can remember being at Notre Dame and little things like when people first started wearing white cleats or cleats that were colored. I was like, no way. Like, we're wearing black cleats. Like, you're not wearing that here. Like, you can just put that up. Tattoos. I remember my first player at Notre Dame that got a tattoo on her arm, down at the lower part of her arm. I made her wear a sleeve on the arm to cover up the tattoo because I was afraid back then the image was different. It was a different time. Facebook had just come out, and I think if memory serves me right, I think Northwestern or Duke or somebody, one of their soccer teams had just got suspended for a whole semester where they couldn't do anything because there were some issues, pictures and things floating around Facebook. So I can remember the first few years I was at Notre Dame, we didn't allow anybody on Facebook. Now, I think they had their own private accounts that I never knew about, but like just things like that. And of course, now, how important social media is and branding. And now you learn then that's part of life. You have to kind of accept it, but now you got to worry about teaching them how to use it the proper way and being careful of what they put on it. But, I've gone from like, no, we're not doing those things to, okay, I've got to change a little bit. I can't continue to coach that way. So those are some things, even off the field, that, we grow with the times and we change with the times. I think on the field, the game has clearly changed because the game now, whether you do it at the international level or you do it at the collegiate level or the professional level, it's such a game of transitions now. You have to know how to possess and when to possess, but then you also have to know how to go quick, and you have to know how to counter. And then there's so much pressing that's being done now. Like you wouldn't survive if we taught the game the way we did 10 years ago, in the modern game today. I was just watching games this weekend, and I think I tweeted something out about it, but I'm watching Liverpool play in the FA Cup this weekend against Norwich. I believe. Yeah. And I'm going, why does Norwich continue to try to play out of the back when Liverpool is so good at pressing?
Yeah.
And, they gave up the first couple of goals is off of
Yep.
their mistake. And then, I think I saw Man City play Tottenham earlier in the week, and it was the same thing. Tottenham continued to try to play out of the back, and it's late in the game, like 4 minutes left.
Yep.
And they're trying to play pretty soccer, building out of a goal kick, and Man City wins it, gets a corner, scores a game-winning goal, with about 2 minutes left, all off of that. And it's like sometimes, like, shouldn't we be a little bit more pragmatic? So all of these things now come into play, whereas years ago, it was like, no, I'm just lumping the goal kick forward and we play
Yep.
from there. Teams weren't trying to build out. Teams weren't pressing. There weren't organized pressing triggers like there are now. The transition game and the athleticism of the teams now, that's one of the things that really, I know it's one thing to see the Women's World Cup on television, but to go down and see it at the field level, the speed of the game, the strength of these players, just watching Australia and England warm up before the game and just seeing their players strike 40-yard balls across the field to a teammate. It's on a rope and it's a laser, and it's just like, just the ball striking alone is such a different level, even than the collegiate level. It's amazing athletic. So I can only imagine in the men's game, how different. I'm glad I played in an era I played, because I don't know if I could play in the modern game now. Being a small guy that's, not athletic enough, and I was a pretty good player in my day, but I look at these kids now and the way the game's evolved, it's a completely different game.
For sure. For sure. Well, we're just going to transition into a few of the questions that we love asking our guests to hear about, just kind of your personal, playing days and what you
Yep.
learned back in the day, as you just
Yep.
talked about back when you played. What was a defining moment in your soccer career as a player, and why was it so impactful? What life and leadership lessons did you learn from it?
I think the biggest thing for me that changed me as a player was when I was young in youth soccer. And again, understand, we didn't have soccer in the city I grew up in until I was 12 years old. So I didn't start playing until I was 12. And back then, the first couple of years, there wasn't enough kids to have age group teams. So 12-year-olds, we were playing with 17-year-olds. I mean, it was all lumped in. We had enough for about 8 or 10 teams, I think. And we were all lumped together. But back in those days, I was always late in maturing. So I was never as athletic or as fast or as strong as the players I played against growing up. And I think the thing that really changed my course was playing for Simon Sanchez, who was my high school coach at the time, and also our club coach, because we all, the high school team just played for the club team. It was back then you played for your city. You didn't go play for club like you mentioned Solar earlier. There was no Solars around. You played for the city that you lived in. And he was a former pro player out of Mexico, and he just really gave me the passion for the game and the drive to get better and the confidence. And I think that's such a big thing as coaches, is developing players. It's not always about the talent piece of it, right? And the skills piece. I mean, that's a huge piece of it. But getting that player's mentality and the confidence and their self-belief is so important. And it really turned for me when I started to play for him in high school, because up until that point, my freshman year, I was on a JV. All my friends were on the varsity. And then he just spent time working with me, that year. And that next year, I ended up on varsity, ended up becoming the captain of the team. And I just blossomed, and went on and got a college scholarship and had some success as a player at that point. But I think the defining moment for me was having him in my life. I don't think there's a one game thing that really changed or defined me. I think it was having somebody like that really believed in me, and I really fed off of that. So that would probably be it for me. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And folks out there, if that doesn't inspire you to be a coach, I don't know what will. That to see how we as coaches, it may not even be that a player goes on to, be the best player in the world, but that they go on to do other things to impact other people. So it's that multiplicative approach that we as coaches can coach others, that will then coach others, that will then go out and to be able to impact lives. And so your impact as a coach is not just in the here and now, it's in years and years to come. And so hopefully you as a coach are thinking about that legacy well beyond this season, because this season may be disappointing, but
Yeah.
think about the impact you're able to have on the young girls, young boys, young men, young women, that you're able to do that because they're all going to be going on and doing other things well beyond that team. So love that.
Yeah, Randy, you've been part of the game for a long time. You've coached it literally every level, especially on the women's side. Give us kind of a glimpse into what you think as a country we're doing well, and maybe some things you think we need to continue to work on as a country within the game of soccer.
Yeah, and I tell you, Paul, that's a really broad question. I do
It
think,
is, but what hits you the
yeah,
hardest of
you
those
know what,
things?
I think what we've done well is this. I do think we have a lot of talent in this country, and contrary to what a lot of people think, when they see the World Cup and they see Spain play and the way they play, which I think we'd all agree is amazing. There's this perception that everybody has caught us and passed us up. And I don't know that that's necessarily the case. I think we really, really have some talented players. I do think there's a lot of good club coaches and high school coaches out there that are working with players and developing our players. Now, I think there's a lot of bad ones out there as well. A country that's so big, you're going to get a little bit of both. But I do think what we've done that I've seen since even my years at Baylor, the game has changed so much for the women, right? I mean, we have more better players. So I think we are producing a better pool of players than we've ever done before. I think to me the problem is is so big that I don't know how we change it, but I think our system of paying to play in the long run has really hurt us. And I know initially it was a way for coaches to make a living, and rightfully so, because they're professionals. They put the time in coaching education and so forth. So they should be getting paid for their time. But I think now it has snowballed so much. I think we all know that coaches around clubs around the country are coaching too many teams. There's not enough field space for players to get on the field. I was down at FC Dallas a year or two ago and went out one night to watch those kids train. And there's 5 or 6 teams on one field. You got a quarter of a field to work. And so how can you do anything really in that kind of a space? And, club coaches that are taking on 2 or 3 teams and or more. There's just a lot of things that we're doing wrong. The pay for play model inherently in its the way it's constructed is not a good way to do it because the parents are now the consumer, right? So they always in any other walk of life would have a voice, and they do now. When they're not happy with the product, and they're going to go to the coach or to the manager of McDonald's if they're not happy with what they ordered, or so they are the consumer. And I think we lose sight of that with the clubs that they are. So we have to find a way to manage that a little better. So I don't know how we roll that back. I mean, short of sponsors coming in and starting to develop academies that are true academies, like more so like they are in Europe. And I don't think that'll ever happen here with our numbers. I don't know how we change that. I think it's too easy for players and parents now to not be happy and to uproot and just jump from team to team instead of really, really find a coach that can maximize that player's development and not worry so much about wins and losses. I think that's a big issue. I think our method of selecting our best players is probably not the most efficient now. I know now we got scouts, that are U.S. soccer scouts that are out watching, all of these ECNL and GA events and everything else. But I'm not sure the scouts themselves are well versed in what it looks like at the international level, at the top level. I think a lot of the scouts, quite frankly, didn't have a lot of success with teams that they'd had before. Like, I just think there's a litany of issues there. The old school way we used to do it with ODP and the, regional camps and regional teams, in hindsight, might not have been such a bad model after all, where you're bringing the best players from every state in and getting a week to see them train and play and then keeping those players over. I'm not advocating that we go back to that, but I'm not so sure that wasn't a better method than what we have now. The country's just so big, and does a scout really know what our U20 coach wants or what our U17 coach wants and the way they want to play? And, what does our umbrella look like? Hopefully Emma will change some of this, and I think she's a good choice. I'm behind her, hoping that she does. But it should look, it should be some vertical integration. The young players should be playing the way the senior team's playing, and there should be some similarities in the game model, but between those teams. And that's one thing I think Spain has done a really good job of is I think their countries years ago was divided into these 4 regions. And so they, in essence, have 4 national teams for every age group. So those national teams went out and played around the world. And then when they got ready for a major event, they would bring those national teams together and select, their full team from it. But they were all playing the same style and the same system. And you see that now, whether you watch a Barcelona play or you watch their national team play, it's all very conducive to being similar to their style. And I don't know that as a country we really have our style. I think we have some qualities, our players, and what our makeup is, that we can win off of our aggression and our athleticism, competitiveness. But we're going to have to put some things in place to improve the brand that we're playing. So I just see it really at the youth level. I see that's where our biggest issues lie. And I don't know that the senior team will really change if we don't get something done at the bottom. Yeah.
I'd agree with that, Ray. It's funny. It's probably the second time in the last 2 or 3 weeks that the conversation about the old ODP has come up, and how it used to be done. And even then we were missing players, and it wasn't a perfect system either. But looking back on that, there were some things about it that you even just described that were somewhat beneficial to that.
Yeah. Well, it's a big country. That's always going to be a problem.
Yeah.
It's such a large country. But I do think, listen, they brought in a few of these young players like a Jaden Shaw, out of Dallas. That's I think there's a lot of Jaden Shaws out there. I do think we have talent. It's just harnessing that talent, finding a game model that fits the way we want to play, and really kind of having a vision again. Like I think we should be looking, we're on the women's side, at least, we're still going to remain one of the top teams in the world for the foreseeable future. But I don't think we need to do it World Cup to World Cup. I think we probably should be planning out 10 more years, and going, what can we do to affect these 8, 9, 10-year-olds that are coming up now, so that in 10 years we are playing some of the best football in the world. And have others caught us? I think it's just that others have invested, whereas, Spain and France and Germany and those teams weren't investing as much as the U.S. in the early years. And now they've made an investment. So they're reaping the rewards of that. And we've got to do the same. So I do think it's a hard look. And I think you're almost going to have to, some people are going to have to make some hard decisions. And I just don't know if we have the people in place at U.S. Soccer that will make those decisions. I hope so.
Yeah, so do I. And, I agree with a lot of what you guys are saying, obviously. And I think, too, you talk about the early years. How do we keep the kids in the game, especially the kids who don't have the money to be able to do the pay to play? Because even if they're good enough to do the ECNL route, I speak my personal situation. That was never an option because I run a ministry and I don't have the funds to be able to do that. So fortunately, there's been some clubs who have scholarshiped my kids, but they're not at that, and even if the ECNL, because the travel on top of the fees and all this other stuff, and even if you don't want, even it's not a money thing, it could be that you want to play other sports. It could be that, which is a good thing from the, lack of specialization, that generalization side of things. So there's so many parts of the argument, or the conversation, but also the fact that, as you talked about, the scouting, even if the scouts do know what they want and do know, then you have the issue of, are they just going to ECNL events? Are they just going to GA events? Because there's a lot of other diamonds in the rough that are going to be out there that we're going to miss. And like you said, the size of the country, you can't see everybody. You can't possibly do that. But, are there better ways? Probably. But, we all got to, who's going to agree on those? Who's going to be able to figure that out? And you're always going to miss people. So I guess they just say, well, let's just keep doing what we're doing because we're doing good enough. As we say, though, often good is often the enemy of great. And I think that you see that sometimes, but hopefully we will start making some changes and it will get to be the best it can be. All right, there are two last questions that we have for all of our guests, and then we will wrap it up. But how have you used the lessons you've learned directly from the game of soccer in your marriage and in your parenting?
That's a great question. I think it's just trying to keep a balance and do the right things. If you're always, and I use the word preaching lightly, but if you're always with your team in a team setting and you're trying to set the right examples for your players, in front of them, then you got to be willing to bring those examples home and do the right things there at home too. Yeah, it sounds like you guys have done a little bit of this with your kids and coaching as well. But, Ben grew up playing for me as well. And that's always hard when you have a parent that's a coach and then their child plays for them, because they're always going to get, those that say, well, they're playing because they're the coach's son or the coach's daughter or whatever. And so I think you just have to take some of those lessons that you've learned in life and in coaching and make sure that you equate those to your family, your marriage, your kids, because I do think sport teaches a lot of great life lessons. You have to learn to communicate. You have to learn to listen. You have to learn to be present and to take advantage of the time that you have, just like you do when you're with your teams. If you're not a good communicator, then I think you're going to have a really difficult time being a good coach. And it's the same way at home. You can't turn that switch off when you go home. So I think it's all about, to me, the biggest thing is just do the right thing, just live the life the right way. And I was really lucky that I grew up in a family that, of course, I grew up at a different time. So my dad was a really, really strict disciplinarian. I got the belt a few times, back in the day, but I always knew, right and wrong. And there wasn't a gray area. There wasn't, it's pretty black and white. And that's the way I've always tried to do it at my house as well. Not the belt part, but the black and white part. Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll get with Ben on that. And
That's
ask
right.
the story behind that. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, I laugh. My kids are young to where like a few of my young ones aren't even sure that I even know anything about soccer, or their mom for that fact. So it's kind of like, okay, yeah, just go listen to your recreational coach who played basketball in high school. They'll get
That's
you
right.
under control, bro. So Randy, last, because you've already talked about being a reader, how you like to read other coaches, which I think is some fantastic advice that I learned a lot from other coaches and other sports and disciplines. But give us some other things that you've maybe watched, read, or listened to that have really impacted how soccer explains leadership.
Well, I do try to read a lot, and I think there's several good people out there that are doing things on leadership. I think even watching the TED Talk stuff there's some of those that I think are very, very good. I think there's some that better than others, as the case for anything. But I do think that you've gotta. It's a piece of your coaching. It's almost like there's a tactical piece we have to teach. There's a technical piece. There's a physical and a psychological piece. But I do think there's a leadership piece in there, and I do think you've got to look outside of the soccer norms to find ways to help you grow as becoming a better leader. And that's why I think books, from, guys like Abrams and, the TED Talks and those kind of things, I think you can always pick up something good. Jeff Jansen's got some good stuff out there. I mean, you can pick up bits and pieces from a lot of different people. We here at Pitt have brought the TED Talk people in for our coaches, and they've come in and done a few sessions. And some of the work that they've done with our coaches, I think, has been outstanding. Becky's come in, and I think my only thing I would say with the leadership piece of it is it's like anything else. Find the right balance, to where all your time's not spent on building and developing leadership and worrying about that. Like you still have to come in and train. You still have to come in and do a soccer piece. There's still.
Yep.
I do think sometimes you can get so caught up into one area, like all I'm really going to worry about is the tactics. Well, then I need to make sure I spend more time in the leadership part, more time in the technical side of things or whatever. And I think it's the same for leadership. I think we can get caught up. I found that to be something I learned a little bit when I went to the Dash, because we started really getting into the sports science, because the league was really diving into the sports science piece. And I can remember going to a clinic that David Moyes held in San Antonio, and going to that clinic and talking to him about it. And he said the same thing. He said, look, now he's a little bit more old school than I am, but one of the things he said is, we do take the technology for sports science, and we do have to look at it in our periodization and all that. He said, but at some point in time, someday you just got to get on the line and do some work. There's sometimes you just got to look at your team and say, maybe the sports science is telling me not to do this, but I need it from the mental side of it, where they got to learn to grind through some hard work. And I think that's the same thing I would say, sports science, whether it's leadership or whatever. I do think it's a part that we have to utilize and grow and add that to our layers of tools that we have as a coach. But I don't think it can be the be all and the end all. I think it's just one of the layers that we need to continue to put in place.
Yeah, and I think there's so much to it. It's nuanced, as we talk about. There's not one right answer to all of that. You gotta put it in the mix and figure out what is the best for these players at this time.
Yeah.
And that's something that we can Monday morning quarterback a lot of things here. But I love all that you talked about. Thank you so much for all you're doing. Thank you for being faithful to your call, being faithful to what you believe God has put you on this earth to do. Appreciate that. I'm very grateful for you coming on, taking the time to be with us on the show.
Well, thank you guys for having me. I really enjoyed it. That time flew by, so I appreciate it very much. You made it easy.
Yeah.
Always great, Randy. Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, guys.
Well, folks, thank you for being a part of this. Thank you for engaging. Thank you for listening. And if you want to see any of the things that we've talked about on the show, you can check all those out at the show notes. You can check out Warrior Way. Paul is sporting the, I don't know if it's a hoodie or a jacket. It's a Warrior Way hoodie right there. You can see what that's all about. You can go check that out at the show notes. Coaching the Bigger Game, the disc stuff that we do, you can check that out at the show notes as well. As always, folks, we hope that what you're taking from this show, you are using it to help you be a better parent, a better spouse, a better player, better coach, a better leader, better in all that you do. And you continue to remind yourself that soccer does explain life and leadership. Thanks a lot. Have a great couple weeks.